And first, I want to thank Senators Stabenow, Warner, and Kelly for joining us. I just make a note, this is the 118th Congress, and we passed our 118th judge today. So I feel very good about that. Now, let me talk a little bit about banking. First, in regards to banking, I believe that President Biden and Secretary Yellen, Chairman Powell, did a good job in staunching the contagion we all worried about, but they have to stay vigilant and continue their hands-on approach. There are currently many proposals on the table that are worth considering, but of course every one of them will need bipartisan support to pass. Raising the $250,000 FDIC limit is a serious proposal and should be carefully studied. Of course, the cost should be paid by the banks, not by the taxpayer. And it's important because it will strengthen smaller banks and prevent depositors from putting their money into larger banks. But on the other hand, there is a moral hazard argument which could have significant impacts on our economy in the long run. So in short, this is not an easy question and will require careful consideration. But one thing is certain. A good part of this failure, there are other causes as well, but a good part of this failure was regulatory, and we need a much stronger regulatory regime. Now, what we do not need is our House Republicans sowing chaos by threatening default and absurdly linking the banking crisis to default, dangerously linking the banking crisis to default. What we need instead is calmness, stability, careful consideration of the facts. Undermining the full faith and credit of the U.S. is never a good idea, but in the aftermath of a major bank collapse, it's supremely reckless. But that is precisely what some House Republicans, including the chairman of the House Budget Committee, are doing right now. During the House Republican annual retreat, the House Budget Committee chair and other Republicans said that now is, quote, the best time to double down on debt ceiling brinkmanship as news of SBC's collapse remains at the front of mind. They're threatening a global economic crisis over the debt limit. At the same time, we have this problem in the banking industry. And of course, as we know, they are still refusing to show the American people their plan. It's ridiculous. It's reckless. Instead of making radical comments that threaten even more financial turmoil, Republicans should work with Democrats to ensure a default never happens, not with brinksmanship, not with hostage-taking. That means raising the debt ceiling without strings attached. Now on chips, another issue we will discuss here. This is a big week for one of the biggest accomplishments of the last Congress and perhaps of our generation, the Chips and Science Bill. Quiet. Thank you. Yesterday, the administration released a proposed rule to implement the CHIPS national security guardrails, ensuring that President Xi and the CCP can't benefit from increased investment from microchip production in the U.S. When I crafted this bill, I worked to put in these guardrails to make certain that companies receiving CHIPS incentives use that funding to expand production in the U.S., not in China. We wanted to make sure they got money from the government to build here. They couldn't use their excess money to go build in China. And the guardrails that are put on by Commerce and Treasury have worked well, are very good and very strong and will work well. The administration's implementation of these guardrails will restrict the CCP's access to cutting-edge technology. And this week also included the release of guidance to implement the CHIPS ITC, the investment tax credit. We worked hard to include this critical ITC in the Chips and Science Bill, and the administration's swift implementation of the ITC is appreciated and will help deliver on the hundreds of billions of dollars in proposed microchip investment across the U.S. Even more is to come on further guidance around permitting, workforce, and the release of applications for funds by Commerce in the days ahead. This is a very good week for chips, for science, for American jobs. We're working closely with the administration to implement this critical program without delay. It's too vital to our country, our workers, our communities, and our future. Senator Warner is going to go ahead of Senator Stabenow because he has to chair an Intelligence Committee hearing.
Thank you, Leader Schumer, and I'm going to make a few comments about the CHIPS bill. Thank you for your leadership on that legislation. Senator Stabenow, Senator Kelly, he's going to speak to the CHIPS bill as well. You know, we started this, John Cornyn and I, back in June of 2020, because we had seen, particularly from the Intelligence Committee and national security standpoint, the slow erosion over literally 25 plus years where America's position as the leading innovator and manufacturer of semiconductor chips, chips that are vital to any device that has an on and off switch on it, had fallen from about 37% of the global market down to about 12%. At that same time frame, we'd seen a dramatic increase in the PRC's manufacture and innovation of chips, and we'd seen a migration of literally every cutting-edge chip that our armed services and our advanced chips made, all being made in Taiwan. So the CHIPS and Science Act wound its way through the process. I think it is safe to say without this legislation, there would never have been another semiconductor manufacturing facility built in America. Now we've had already a half dozen such announcements made and many more in the queue. My last comment is simply this. It was critical for the CHIPS Act to be supplemented by the investment tax credit. And again, Senator Schumer took a leadership role in that. We now have the Commerce Department and others starting to put the guardrails in place to make sure that these American dollars don't end up benefiting additional expansion in China. It is so critically important that we get the implementation of CHIPS right, because I believe the definition of national security going forward goes well beyond tanks, guns, ships, and planes. It includes who controls the innovation and manufacture of semiconductor chips, who's going to deal with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, synthetic biology, advanced energy, all areas where I believe we, with our allies, are going to have to compete with a Communist Party in China that is extraordinarily aggressive in investing and candidly stealing intellectual property. We've got to put an end to that. The CHIPS Act is the first step down. I think we're going to have to make other types of investments in these other cutting-edge technologies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm also excited to talk about what we did in the CHIPS and Science Act. I first want to back up, though, and say in total in the last 2 years, with President Biden's leadership, our Democratic majority in the Senate, as well as the Democratic majority in the House, we have been able to do extraordinary things in every part of people's lives to support them, to support children, to support families, to support seniors. And people are now seeing the benefits as these have been implemented. From more rural high-speed internet, or in our cities where we have more schools, we have telemedicine, we have small businesses, we have farmers that are now being able to connect in a way that allows them to be more successful, to the $35 cap on insulin for our seniors. And because of the leadership of the President and all of us pushing on the companies that make insulin, we're now seeing that they are moving forward on $35 cap for others as well. We want to lock that in legislatively to make sure they can't go backwards on that. But we are moving forward in so many ways that affects people's lives. And excitingly, we are bringing jobs home. That's really what the CHIPS and Science Act is all about. It's exciting to see a new renaissance in American manufacturing, making things here. You know, I remember during the auto rescue and the debate in 2009, Republican colleagues saying, well, it doesn't matter where a car is made, as long as you can get a cheap vehicle or get a vehicle, it doesn't matter where it's made. Well, it does matter where it's made. It's about jobs, and it also matters where every component part is made. And when we went into the pandemic, and over half of the chips for the auto industry were made in one company in Taiwan, and they couldn't get those chips, that made a difference. It matters. So it's exciting to see the vision overall that we have for building America, bringing jobs home, and investing in the future. And that includes the tax credits, not just investment tax credits, but we're now saying you get a tax credit if you make it here. The production tax credit is what causes the battery, the solar, the wind, the electric vehicle to be built in America. So this is a vision that is working for people in our country, and I'm very proud of all the component parts and where we're rebuilding the American semiconductor industry, and as Senator Warner said, we are focusing on strengthening America's national security. So this is a vision. There are a number of parts. It's working for people, and we want to keep it going, investing in American families and America's future.
Senator Kelly.
Oops, excuse me, sir. Could we do a Nancy?
Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about what this, means for, our economy and our national security. I just want to elaborate on what Senator Schumer and Senators Warner and Stabenow said. Great for our economy. It's going to help us grow our economy, strengthens our national security, but also what it does is it provides a lot of really good-paying jobs that do not require a 4-year degree. And that's a big deal in the state of Arizona. The TSMC investment in Arizona, they just recently announced, is going to go from $12 billion to $40 billion, creating thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs that you can actually raise a family on that do not require a 4-year degree. But I want to elaborate a little bit on these guardrails. Senator Schumer mentioned them. Senator Warner mentioned them, and Senator Stabenow as well, I believe, because it's important to recognize that this is not a blank check that any company is getting, and the guardrails are significant. First, any company that gets more than $100,000 in federal support is going to be prohibited from building new factories or to make an advanced microchip in China for 10 years. I mean, that's significant. Secondly, the guardrails are also going to crack down on expanding production capabilities of legacy chips in China to ensure that no federal dollars are indirectly subsidizing an investment in China. And lastly, these guardrails are going to prevent both companies and researchers from partnering with researchers in China or researchers who are funded by the Chinese government. And this is going to help and make sure that American innovation is not stolen by the Chinese. So, these guardrails, they're tough, but they are definitely necessary, and it's going to help us fulfill the vision of the CHIPS Act to develop and make more semiconductor chips here in the United States, not only to help us grow our economy, but to make sure that we have the semiconductor chips that we need for our national security. So thank you.
Okay, questions? Yes, Mr. Burgess. I do. I support his nomination. I've looked over everything about him. I think he'd be an outstanding judge. You took a... Look, I think it's premature to talk about it. We don't know what's going to happen yet. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have confidence in Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA?
Look, the bottom line is, as I said, it's premature to comment on what's happening, and we'll have to wait and see what he does. Yes.
On TikTok, do you believe that app should be banned in the United States, and what's your message to content creators out there?
Look, there are serious security concerns with TikTok. I share them. I've talked to Senator Warner about his legislation. I think that we're going to have to look at this very, very carefully, and I think the Senate will. Yes.
Have you talked to Senator Fetterman? How's he doing? When do you expect him to return?
You know, he's recuperating. We want to give him the space to recuperate. He needs it. It's fair. It's right. There are other people in the Senate who have taken their time to recuperate, but I'm confident he's going to come back and be an outstanding and fine senator. Go ahead.
Can I ask you about the Fed just raised interest rates by 25 basis points? What's your reaction?
Look, this is a very tough decision. There are competing equities on both sides. I will say I am concerned about its effect on the economy. Last one.
On the AUMF, Speaker McCarthy did not commit to bringing this bill, the repeal bill, up on the House side. Are you worried that it's going to hit a brick wall when it gets to the House?
Look, there's a lot of strong supporters across the Republican caucus on it. Chip Roy's, I think, a co-sponsor of the bill. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic once we pass it here in the Senate, and you've seen the margin we passed it by in the Senate, that the House will pass it too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.